So I'd like to share with you something that the Food and Drug Administration, the kinds of power, the power that the FDA holds, and this can very well happen to the vaping industries, especially manufacturers. Um, I just want to speak to it. This comes out of a law firm, but they have like this blog, and every so often, even when I do the news of whenever I go live, I'll do the news, and I always go to this website. So anyway, this was published on May 3rd, 2019. It's called "Court Blesses FDA's Rarely Used Administrative Search Warrant Authority." So a recent decision out of Pennsylvania caught our eye, not because it applied a new enforcement strategy by FDA, but to the contrary, because it relied on FDA's oldie but goodie inspection warrant authority. Not a search warrant, which is subject to the same probable cause standard as all criminal search warrants, but an administrative tool that is rooted in the inspection provisions of the FDC Act. That's the Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, 21 United States Code 374A. FDA admits it rarely uses this authority. FDA does not routinely request inspection warrants in order to conduct investigations or inspections of regulated industry. However, warrants have been used effectively to gather information that has been refused improperly. So let's say, for instance, the FDA goes to your, I don't know, pick on Evolve. It's a U.S. manufacturer, or Raven's Moon, or whatever have you. Goes to we'll pick on Raven's Moon because they're more like into mods and RDAs and stuff like that, and it's based in the USA. I mean, they could actually go after foreign manufacturers as well, like Inikin and whatever else have you. But we'll do Raven's Moon. So let's say the FDA inspectors go to Raven's Moon looking for some particular information, and the Raven's Moon actually refuses to give the FDA that information. Well, then that inspector will go back to the FDA, tell the FDA what happened, and then they will actually issue an inspection warrant. Yes. And if you refuse that, then they'll take you to court, and then there's all kinds of things that can come out of that. They can get automatically no sales tobacco order. They can get civil monetary penalties, or even criminal sanctions. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but it's mainly coming out of this particular case here that was just decided upon. It was against the Spa Organic Essentials after a nationwide outbreak of salmonella was linked to kratom distributed by the company. And the court concluded there was ample probable cause for the FDA to conduct this search. The court denied as premature FDA's request to compel the company to speak with investigators on the ground that the warrant did not affirmatively require the company to engage in testimonial conduct, just a seizure of records. Thus, the court instructed FDA to take steps to first compel production of the information. So first the FDA has to go to, let's say, Raven's Moon, and they're looking for some information on Jay Hayes or whoever it may be. Well, guess what? They can refuse that. Raven's Moon can refuse that. The FDA has to make that attempt first to require, to give Raven's Moon they submit the information to the FDA voluntarily. The first must be done on a voluntary basis. And then if Raven's Moon refuses to hand over Jay Hayes's, I don't know, whatever documents in regards to his RDAs or whatever have you, then the FDA can get an inspection warrant and literally go in there and retrieve this information. which is they can retrieve the information, and Raven's Moon can't do anything about it. So it's just rather interesting here. Anyway, this case serves as a good reminder to all FDA-regulated entities of the arsenal of tools FDA has to conduct its regulatory oversight. We assume FDA will only use the inspection warrant in limited circumstances as prescribed by the RPM, but companies should know that a decision to refuse an inspection may be short-lived. So if Raven's Moon or any company, doesn't necessarily have to be hardware, it could be e-liquid manufacturers or any of those. In fact, it could be wholesalers, distributors, importers, exporters, retailers, or any of that matter. But mainly they're more likely to go after manufacturers, e-liquid manufacturers, hardware manufacturers, but it can be very well be retailers. So let's say the FDA goes into, I mean, it could go into any shop. Let's say it goes into, it could be Jay Hayes' shop. It could be anyone's shop. They could go into anyone's shop, and let's say Jay Hayes says, no, you can't look at my records. What, that which contains receipts and all kinds of other goodies. Okay. The reason why I say use Jay Hayes as an example, because everyone knows them. It could be Mike Vapes. Like Mike Vapes, perfect example. I'll use Mike Vapes. Mike Vapes, he has an online retail business. So let's say regardless if it's a brick and mortar or online, it doesn't matter. That online shop is tied into some kind of structure. In other words, Mike Vapes is probably either in his house where he actually has his online business. It's not like the online business is just online. You understand? It's coming from some kind of either a brick and mortar, but probably in Mike's case, it's probably coming out of his house. So, or maybe he has his own little business building that he goes to, like Do It Yourself or Die. He rents space in a business building or something like that, or whatever have you. Anyway, the point is they can go to Mike Vapes and say, look, we want all the receipts on these plastic bottles that that were modified back in 2016 from glass to plastic. You're not supposed to do that. And Mike says he refuses to give any of that information to the FDA. Well, then the FDA comes back with an inspection warrant, and he's unable to refuse. Now he can call an attorney to try to stop that that process from continuing on. But as soon as the FDA issues that inspection warrant, they can come into even, and this is where it's kind of weird because a lot of I don't know where exactly Mike Vapes has his particular online thing going on. I don't know what you want to call it, platform, I guess. If it's in his house, then it can get a little difficult for the FDA because it can't necessarily go into a house unless the building itself is an actual building. Now, for the FDA to go into Mike Vape's house and then go into his basement where the monitors and his computer system is at in order to do his online business, it can get a little iffy there. And FDA has to watch out because that's when you actually need an actual search warrant because you're entering someone's house. On the other hand, it's like Jay Hayes' vape shop, on the other hand, the FDA can easily go into that vape shop. Once Jay Hayes refuses that information, the FDA can get the inspection warrant, go into the vape shop. Jay Hayes can call his attorney and to impede that process or slow down that process, but eventually it's going to be fought out in court. It's going to cost Jay Hayes a whole bunch of money, and in the end, the FDA is going to win anyway. Why? Well, because of this case right here. They just ruled on this case. This is an up-to-date case. This is April 17, 2019. So it's an administrative case, and this affects all decisions administratively. So he could impede the process, but eventually the FDA is going to seize these particular documents in regards to whatever the FDA was looking for in regards to Jay Hayes' shop, or anyone's shop. I'm not just picking on him, or anyone for that matter. Mike Vapes is a little different because it's his. I'm going to presume that his business is in his basement of his own house. Now, the outside of the basement, the rest of the house, they would need to have probable cause to go from the front door into the basement. I don't know how he gets into his basement. Now, on the other hand, if there was a door that led down to the basement from, I don't know, from the street level, then the FDA can very well get around that with no problem. But if they have to go through the front door of the house and go through the house to go down the stairs into the basement, that can get a little iffy there for the FDA, because what they're mainly talking about here is an actual business, an actual brick and mortar or online business it can apply to, because once again, these online platforms are coming from some kind of quote unquote brick and mortar, or some kind of concrete building or brick building or stucco building, or I don't know, whatever, it's not like it's floating in the sky or anything. It's attached to some kind of building that this online stuff is coming from. So I just wanted to put this out there. It just shows how much power that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has. They have a lot of power to do a lot of nasty things. And before I let you go, I just want to look at the decision plus the code and share that with you. Just 1 second. I hope you can read this. I don't know how well on your screen, but this is the 21 United States Code 374 that they quoted in that particular blog. And 374, inspection. A, right of agents to enter, scope of inspection, notice, promptness, and exclusions. 1, for purposes of enforcement of this chapter, officers or employees duly designated by the Secretary, upon presenting appropriate credentials and a written notice to the owner, operator, or agent in charge, are authorized, A, to enter at reasonable times any factory, warehouse, or establishment in which tobacco products are manufactured, processed, packed, or held for introduction into interstate commerce, or after such introduction, or to enter any vehicle being used to transport or hold such tobacco products in interstate commerce. So, like, we'll do Mike Vapes because he's rather interesting. Everything else is pretty easy, but circumstances like Mike Vapes, on the other hand, now it says any or establishment, and like it says, or held, meaning that they actually have it in a warehouse or whatever. Now, I don't know exactly how Mike Vapes conducts his business, and he's not the only one that has these online shops. Could be like maybe, I don't know if Vapor DNA has their own actual brick and mortar. I don't think so, but they may. I don't know. So let's say Mike Vapes maybe has his, you'll order e-liquid from his website. You'll order hardware, accessories, or whatever, cottons and wicks and wires and whatever. The question is those particular products actually in his house, in the basement, ready to be shipped out? Or does he have these particular items sitting in some warehouse? Or I don't know exactly how he does it. You know what I mean? So I maybe, but whoever has the products where it's held, quote unquote, held, is where the FDA will go. So if Mike Vapes does not have the products in his basement or in his house somewhere or in a shed or whatever have you on his property, then they will go to wherever these products are held at, and then they will do their inspection. On the other hand, like it says, manufactured, processed, packed, or held. say held. And what that means is for introduction into interstate commerce or even a vehicle. It could be like, no, I don't know, maybe you're transporting vapor products in a vehicle. It could be a van or a truck. They actually have authority to pull that truck over to the side of the road and inspect it. Says B, to inspect at reasonable times and within reasonable limits and in a reasonable manner such factory, warehouse, establishment, or vehicle, and all pertinent equipment, finished and unfinished materials, containers, and labeling therein. So even if it's usually it's a manufactured finished product, but they can also do it if it's unfinished. Very interesting. In the case of any person, excluding farms and restaurants, who manufactures, processes, packs, transports, distributes, holds, or imports foods, well, that's nothing to do with us, thank goodness. And then they talk about drugs. And they talk about tobacco products in here. So, okay, so they do include okay, they do include the drugs which in this area here. So, to inspect at reasonable time, ba-boom and ba-bum, the inspection shall extend to all records and other information described in Section 350C of this title when the standard for records inspection under paragraph 1 or 2 of Section 350CA of this title applies, subject to the limitations established in Section 350CD of this title. In the case of any factory, warehouse, establishment, or consulting laboratory in which prescription drugs, non-prescription, ba-boom and ba-bum, and then they say, are tobacco products which are adulterated or misbranded within the meaning of this chapter, or which may not be manufactured, introduced into interstate commerce, or sold or offered for sale by reason of any provision of this chapter, boom, boom, have been or being manufactured. So it can even be manufactured. It could be actually on the conveyor belt. It doesn't even have to be in its finished product stage. It can actually be being manufactured. No inspection authorized by the proceeding shall extend to financial data, sales data other than shipment data, pricing data, personnel data, and research data. So they're not necessarily going after financial data, but they are going after shipping data, pricing data, and personnel data, and research data. Says a separate notice shall be given for each such inspection, but a notice shall not be required for each entry made during the period covered by the inspection. Each such inspection shall be commenced and completed with reasonable promptness. So, and then they go into all this other stuff. This is pretty long. I covered this to a degree in another video some time ago. But it's just rather interesting that a court of law actually ruled in favor of the FDA that they can do these inspection warrants. Let me pause this and try to get to that section. Well, what's interesting is in that particular inspection document, there's nothing in there about warrants. But let me share this this memorandum. This is coming out of the case. It's number 1:18-MC-546 in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. This is the opinion of the court. This case involves an administrative search warrant executed by the Food and Drug Administration, comes before us for resolution of two motions. Get to the gist of it. So this is interesting. Several other significant Fourth Amendment type of search and seizure tenets apply in this administrative search warrant setting. For example, the good faith exception to the exclusionary rule, which prevents exclusion of evidence seized in good faith reliance upon a warrant whose validity later comes into question, extends to administrative searches like the search conducted in this instant case. Therefore, spa and organic essentials would not be entitled to quash an administrative warrant and suppress the evidence seized pursuant to that warrant by simply alleging that there was some minor technical deficiency in what otherwise appeared to be a facially valid warrant if the FDA acted reasonably and in good faith in relying upon that warrant. So in that particular case, like for instance, we'll leave it at Mike Vapes because it's interesting. His business is inside of a basement of his own private house. Now, he can raise that as a technicality, but if the FDA acted reasonably and in good faith with that particular warrant, they could very well win on that point. That they had to get to the basement through the house. Rather interesting. I don't know. That's something that Mike would have to fight in a court of law. Let me get to his basic argument here. So it says, Spa and Essentials overbreadth challenge to the warrant also fails. The warrant application affidavit plainly implicated Spa and Essentials in the nationwide distribution of tainted kratom, which had led to outbreaks of salmonella poisoning throughout the United States in 2018, given the refusal of Spa's owners to cooperate in any way in tracing the distribution of these tainted foodstuffs. Warrants command that shipping records and invoices dating back to late 2017 BCs was both reasonable and reasonably related to the probable cause finding made by the court, so their motion to squash was denied. So they were looking for shipping records and invoices. Interesting. Let me pause this again. So it says, we believe that the more appropriate course would be for the government to take additional legal steps to first compel the production of this additional information, rather than seeking to obtain this information through a motion to enforce the current search warrant, where that warrant did not clearly call for such disclosures. Therefore, we will deny this motion without prejudice to the FDA seeking to compel this disclosure through other means. So the FDA will still have to request the information. So what they do is the process will work something like this. The FDA will request information from Mike Vapes or whoever, not just him. I'm not picking on him, but I'm using him as a perfect example. FDA will request information from Mike. Mike refuses to give the information or ignores the letter to him or whatever have you. Then the FDA can actually go in there with an inspection warrant to inspect those particular documents, whatever they're looking for. And then if Mike has a problem, he can challenge that in a court of law. But this is setting precedents right here, this particular case. So who knows? This is in the United States District Court. I'm sure there probably that Spa and Essentials probably appeal it, but we'll see what happens. It's just rather interesting. So it gives power to the FDA. That's the judge right there. Gives power to the FDA to, they first have to be reasonable about it. So they first have to request the information. And then once that is denied, then they can take their inspection warrant and literally force the owner of whatever company it may be to give over whatever document is inside of that warrant. And then if there's a problem with that, then you have to take them to court. It's almost like, in a way, that the FDA are like police, or, they're like the FBI. They almost hold the same, type of power. Not completely, but in a way they do. So I just want to share this with you. I normally don't do a video on their blogs, but this was rather interesting because they stated tobacco products in this particular in these particular documents. So, you have your FDA warning letters they send out. You have 15 working days to correct the situation. But now they also, they've had it, but it never was worded as inspection warrants. But even in that 374 section, there's no warrant. It doesn't say warrant. For instance, like if you go to here, if you search the document, like I did here, see, I put warrant in there. You type that in there and then you search on it. There's nothing comes up on warrant. So there's not, the actual word warrant is not contained within this 21 United States Code 374. But according to the court, it's all about inspection warrants, administrative search warrant. Rather interesting. And what holds more weight is the court rather than the documents or the act of Congress. In other words, this particular part here, this U.S. code, this is the United States Code. This is basically all of the congressional acts in there. I mean, they have statutes at large, but that's a whole different ballgame. It's more of the official body of congressional acts. But this still contains all the acts of Congress, the U.S. Code, or USC, United States Code. And yet in the United States Code passed by Congress, it has nothing in there about warrants. But in the case itself, in the court, it has search warrant, which are rather interesting. And what holds more weight? Well, the courts do. The courts hold more weight than Congress, believe it or not. Now, if Congress has a problem, they can go and rewrite the law. But this is rather interesting, Let me pause this and look at one more thing, and then I'll let you guys go. Okay, so this is where it's really at, right in here. They're basing it on this particular case back in 1978. So it says, in making this probable cause determination, however, it is well settled that probable cause in the criminal law sense is not required. For purposes of an administrative search, such as this, probable cause justifying the issuance of a warrant may be based not only on specific evidence of an existing violation, but also on a showing that reasonable legislative or administrative standards for conducting an inspection are satisfied with respect to a particular establishment. See, so this here, right here, this legislative is coming out of here, because this is legislative. The United States Code is congressional acts, which is legislature or legislative. So the judge took that word right there and applied it to the warrant. It's relative to the warrant because it's coming out of this case here, Marshall versus Barlow's Incorporated. Rather interesting. And they don't necessarily need to have probable cause. It just has to reasonably violate a legislative or administrative standard. So all it has to do is violate this particular legislative standard, which it is a standard. It's the way that the FDA goes on. It's the way they process. It's part of their process as far as inspections are concerned. So within this, like I said, 374 inspection, as long as it's written, see it's written, and it's coming out of this case here, they don't need probable cause. And as long as whatever the issue may be is violating this particular congressional act, then they can do a search warrant. Well, not so much search warrant. It's called an administrative inspection warrant. Rather interesting. I'm glad I looked at that before I let you guys go. So that's interesting. Okay. So, yeah, just be careful about the FDA. I tell you, they have their own administrative search warrants where they can come in and do some nasty stuff to you and have you wind up in a court of law like this particular Spa and Organic Essentials. So, and they lost their case. So anyway, I just wanted to show you how much power that the FDA does have. It's mainly coming out of the United States. When they say secretary, coming out of the United States Health and Human Services Department, they have a lot of power. You know, I've always been, I talked about this once in a while in my past videos. You know, when we had the 1776 American Revolution, and then they set up the Articles of Confederation, and that lasted from 1779 to 1789. And through Alexander Hamilton, as well as many others, Charles Pinckney and many others, they decided to say, hey, we need a centralized government in order to carry out the government more efficiently. So then you wound up with your anti-federalist or anti-centralized government. And then you had the Federalists, which were Alexander Hamilton, Charles Pinckney, and many others. And then you wound up with this kind of centralized government. And it just gets more centralized as time goes by. In the Articles of Confederation, all you had was a Congress. They met there maybe 1 or 2 times a year. And that was it. If they wanted to declare war or something like that, they would meet. And then the 13 colonies would go after whatever they're pissed off about. With the centralized government or the federalist government, you wound up with Congress and executive branch as well as a judicial branch, which is very similar to what we fought against with the British. The British has Parliament, which is basically Congress. You have the Senate, which is basically the House of Lords. You have the House of Representatives, which is basically the House of Commons. You have the judicial branch, which they have in Britain. And then, of course, you have the king. Now, the only thing in our country, thank goodness, is that no one is above the law. So the president on down, as far as his cabinet is concerned, on the executive level, because the president runs every single federal agency there is, except for, of course, unfortunately, the Federal Reserve Board, which is all in cahoots with, J.P. Morgan and whoever else. So, that's a whole different ballgame. I can get into that if you want me to, but that is a whole different. And I'm not just picking on the Federal Reserve Board, though they were one of the meanest badasses around, but there are many other independent federal agencies that the government or the president doesn't really have too much control over. Now, he does appoint the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, but that's where it stops at. Once that chairman is appointed, they pretty much do whatever they like according to the power powerful guys in business. Okay, but that's beside the point. The point is all these federal agencies, outside of these independent federal agencies, but out for the most part, Environmental Protection Agency, FDA. I mean, you name it. Okay, just a slew of them. And then, of course, you have your departments. Okay, that they're your agencies, and then you have your departments like the United States Health and Human Services Department, Department of Interior, Department of Treasury, Department of State, you name it. All of that is under the president, of course. Now, thank goodness there's some checks and balances there, but the president is very well insulated. Very well insulated. I mean, it took a lot. I mean, it really took a real lot to finally get Nixon to resign. Okay? It took a real lot for, well, that's pretty much, I mean, I think there was one other impeachment, actually there was like 2 or 3 other impeachments that were going on that were successful in the past. But they're very well insulated, these presidents, almost to the point like they are a king. The thing is the president is not above the law, even though at times he may think he is. And if he does something, then either those people that feel that the president shouldn't be a king or a queen will seek redress in a court of law to get him in check, get the president in check. Or Congress will do the same thing by defunding certain programs that the president would like, or passing laws that the president, may very well veto, but, they take the chance. It could be a pocket veto, could be all kinds of things going on there. But sometimes Congress can very well get their way if the president lets it lapse. I think it's for 20 days or whatever. The point is the president does hold a lot of power, which is somewhat equivalent to a king, is what we fought against in 1776. He doesn't have as much power as the king. He is not a theocracy. King George and all those guys, the Church of England, there was no separation between the Church of England and state. It was the one and the same, pretty much. He ran the church. Thank goodness our presidents don't run churches or synagogues or mosques or whatever else have you. But nevertheless, they still hold a lot of power. And I've always felt that, I have to adhere to the United States Constitution, but deep down in my heart, I'm really an Articles of Confederation person. But I have to live under the United States Constitution. But that's not what we fought for in 1776. It was the Articles of Confederation, was to give the power to the states rather than to a centralized government or to the king. So my point is this: when you have the FDA having power like an administrative search warrant, well, that's what happens when you have a centralized government. When you wind up putting a lot of power to the president has a lot of power. I mean, the FDA acts because of the United States Department of Health and Human Services Department. And the secretary works right under the president. And so that power is, filtered downward to the FDA and then eventually to the Center for Tobacco Products. And so when you say to yourself, how dare they have so much power? Well, I'm unfortunately going to say that our leaders from 1779 to 1789 were a sellout. A lot of them crossed the line and decided to be Federalists. They were really not Americans, really, even though we are Americans. You understand? When they had the American Revolution. The funny thing I've always said, the Declaration of Independence, to me, is the most beautiful document in the world. And hardly any court system ever cites anything out of that particular Declaration of Independence. That's what really makes an American, was the Declaration of Independence, saying, I'm an American and you're British, and I am putting this, line in the sand. Here I am over here, and there you are over there. And if you don't like it, let's go to war. That was the whole point of the Declaration of Independence. And then, of course, you had, after the war, you had the Articles of Confederation. And then, unfortunately, we had wound up with the United States Constitution. But when people complain about the FDA having all this power, well, that's the kind of government, unfortunately, we wound up with. A very centralized government. And hopefully Congress and the judicial branch reins them in. But as you see in this particular case, the FDA has more power now than ever before. And as far as Congress, when you wrap it up into the whole concept of vaping, there's nothing in Congress that is for vaping. It's all against vaping. So in this particular instant, as far as vaping is concerned, it is extreme centralized government. And this is the reason why a lot of people are hammering on about how dare they do this to vaping. Well, because we have a centralized government anyway, and now we even have more so of a centralized government because these federal agencies are given so much power, and then you have the Congress, which is dead set against vaping. And the president himself is even against vaping with the user fee / federal excise tax, $100 million a year. So, and that'll incrementally go up. It's not just going to be $100 million for 1 year and stay like that for all the years. No, it'll go up via inflation. So, yeah, we have a serious situation in the vaping industry, and it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. At least before you had some hope. Maybe. No, not even now. I gave up hope back in December of 2015. I woke up that month. No one else did, but I woke up in December of 2015. I realized we were going to have a lot of serious problems. Cool. Of course, I still sort of hung on to that Cole Bishop Amendment. I tried. I used to always support that. I thought, okay, maybe, possibly, things will work out because it was a bipartisan bill. Then after that thing died in November and December, actually it was December of 2016, then I knew it was over. Now, I've been hip to this for some time. A lot of vapors have held on thinking, well, we're going to have something's going to turn our way for the better. No. Nothing's going to turn in our way for the better. It's just going to continue to go and be even worse. And this has a lot to do with the centralized government that we have. Now, I'm not calling for a revolution or anything, okay? Don't get me wrong. We're going to lose across the board if you do. It's just the way it is. Maybe back when they were fighting with muskets back 200 years ago, maybe. But right now, they have freaking F-16s, and they got freaking submarines, and they got spy satellites, and this is the centralized government that has all this shit, okay? They got stuff that they can prevent going to a war by just using all these satellites in the sky. They will spy on you. They will break up your networks. They will break up whatever you have cooking in the background before you even think of even making the first move to go to war with the centralized government. There's no way you're going to win. It's what we're stuck with the United States Constitution. I don't particularly care for it, but that's the way it is. And that's the only thing that we have. And that's the only thing I can speak to, because no court system at all known to mankind in the United States and its territories are going to apply Articles of Confederation law, because that's irrelevant to being an American. We changed from the Articles of Confederation to the United States Constitution. That's what we have. Courts hardly ever, if ever, address the Declaration of Independence in their rulings. They only stick with the United States Constitution. So when you say, well, why do we have so many problems with the FDA? Well, I just explained why we do. And on that point, you guys try to have a good one. Bye-bye.